right, good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I see a lot of friendly faces that I know and a few new folks. I'm here for Liz. Many of you are probably expecting Liz to be here today. She's on a much deserved vacation, so I am filling in. So again, happy to have you all here with us today. If I can remind everyone to silence their cell phones, please. And in case anyone is here for the first time, the restrooms, the gentleman's room is right across the way here, and the ladies' room is to the right and then on the left. So I'd like to introduce our speaker. We're very excited to have Scott here with us today. Scott Gordon is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor at Lehigh University, where he teaches English and history, and has chaired both the 22. He wrote on behalf of the historical Moravian Historical Society, a guidebook called Tracing the Earliest Moravian Activity in the Mid-Atlantic. He's been associated with the Jacobsburg Historical Society since 2010, and today we'll talk about new discoveries about the Henry family, thanks to the ongoing project to transcribe the Henry family letters preserved in the Jacobsburg Historical Society archives. So without further ado, we welcome Scott. Thank you.
So first question is, can you hear me? Everything good in the back? Louder if I can. Don't know if there's a louder button here. There's an on and an off is what I see. Is there a louder? I could use this. That better? Better? Yes? Okay, I will try to use this. The trick of this is is making sure I keep it near my mouth. So thank you all for coming out. I've spoken here a few times before, and it's always a great crowd. I'm looking forward to your questions after my part of the talk, or my part of the presentation. Usually when I come in the past, I've had sort of a very, a written out script, hopefully well delivered. That's not what I have today. I think of this more sort of as a book report than a formal talk, because what I really am reporting to you on are the sort of current findings from this project that we've had going on at Jacobsburg for about 2 years now. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But I guess the other thing to say about that is, because it's not a formal talk that I'm reading, feel free to interrupt whenever you want. Raise your hands if you have a question. I'll keep an eye on the time. I know we're supposed to keep it to about an hour, but feel free to interrupt. There'll be time at the end to ask questions too, but feel free to raise your hand if you have a question as I go along. I'm going to change my glasses. Make sure this works. Okay, so who were the Henry family? The Henry family, do people know about Jacobsburg, sort of a few miles up the road, and the Henry family that lived there? As the slide says, the Henrys were a prominent Northampton County family. They were originally from Lancaster County, but by the 1770s, by the middle of the Revolutionary War, they were here. They built their homes and their industry first in Nazareth and then up on the Bushkill Creek, sort of north of Nazareth. And sort of the key event is in 1812, a Henry family member, we call him William Henry III, built a large gun factory on the Bushkill Creek. That's it, or that's the ruins of it. It's not there anymore, but the ruins were still there in the early 19th century. And he called that gun factory Boulton, B-O-U-L-T-O-N. And the name came to refer to the sort of area generally. I'll sort of get back to that in a minute. And 5 generations of the Henry family, most of them accomplished gun makers, lived on this property until 1989. So they built this structure and the houses around it. In 1812, they lived there until 1989, 5 generations. The last Henry who lives there is named Mary Henry Stites. And her will gave the properties to Jacobsburg Historical Society. I don't know if that excites you like it excites me, but The Henrys were a prominent family going all the way back to the 18th century, and they were savers. They saved everything, not just furniture, but happily for historians, papers. And over the course of the 19th century, a lot of those papers, I think the ones that we might think are the most interesting papers, the ones related to the Revolutionary War. William Henry I, who was in Lancaster, was a prominent, he was an early gunsmith, and then he was a prominent patriot, a very high-level procurement officer for both state and continental forces. He was in Lancaster. So all of his papers from the Revolutionary War and a lot of other family papers ended up down at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, which at the time were run by what I would call Henry family members, even though they didn't carry the Henry name. They were Jordans. The librarian at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania was a guy named John Wolfe Jordan, and he was a descendant of William Henry as well. So a lot of the most publicly important, let's say, papers from the Henry family are down in Philadelphia at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. The rest of them were still up in the family home, which you saw on the very first slide. Maybe I should have pointed out. This is the family home that I'll talk a lot more about today. But a lot of the other papers were at that home and in another property across the street. And then in the 60s, those got divided. And all of the papers related to the family's industrial activities, the gunworks, went to a really important industrial history museum. It's in Delaware. It's called Hagley. It's on the DuPont properties. So let's say half to a little more than half of the family papers went down to Hagley. So the rest of them were still left on the properties up on the Bushkill Creek in those houses, and this is what's sort of left. And they were organized. So Mary Henry Stites died in 1989. The Henrys were still living in the properties. And then the properties passed to the Jacobsburg Historical Society, and one of the tasks, in addition to maintaining the properties, a task they took on, thankfully, was to organize the family papers that were left. And the big push to do that really was in 2006. Phil Schroeder, I think, was the project manager on that sort of grant, and a woman named Jan Ballard, who I think at the time was at Moravian University, though she later became the executive director up at Jacobsburg. She was doing the nuts and bolts organizational work. And that happened in 2006. And what she produced was this. It's a little bit larger than this, but you can see the papers are really well organized by who wrote them, and they're all in boxes, and by not just who wrote them, but who he or she wrote them to. It's a beautiful organizational job. This is what one of the boxes looks like if you were to open it up. And as the slide says, organizing the papers is a major accomplishment, but a totally different matter is knowing what's contained in the letters. And that requires reading them. So organizing them tells you where to go look for something if you're looking for something, but there's a whole other world of things to do, which is to read the material. So I had been interested in these family papers. Let me go back one sentence. Most of the people who were interested in the family papers were interested in them because the people were interested in the gun-making business. So most of the research and work on that archive of papers, let me go back one, most of the research and work on these papers were done by people who were interested in the gun-making tradition in Pennsylvania, because the Henrys were important gunsmiths. I got very interested in these papers about 15 years ago. For reasons that I won't even try to explain here. It was sort of an odd process. But one thing that fascinated me about them was that they were a great record of how the Henry family, this prominent family, came to learn about itself. So in the 19th century, if you read through a lot of these letters, you find family members writing to each other, trying to do what we would do on Ancestry.com, pretty much. They're trying to figure out their and they know very little. It's very interesting how little that seems very obvious to us because they found it out. I guess that's why it's obvious to us. We benefit from their research, but it wasn't obvious to them. They weren't really sure 2 generations back who was married to whom, whose children, who had what children, who were cousins to whom. They didn't know this basic information, and they really didn't have an easy way to figure it out, as we do. They didn't have the internet. So one thing these letters contain is a lot of letters back and forth in which this very prominent Pennsylvania family sort of struggled to put together their own history. They knew they were an important family. They knew that William Henry I in Lancaster was a prominent patriot because they had these papers in which he's corresponding with George Washington and other people. And they knew where they lived, they knew about the gunworks, but they just didn't know basics about genealogy and other kinds of things. Many family stories had been passed down. One thing they're trying to do in this in the letters that they're writing back and forth is to figure out whether these stories are true or whether they were tall tales made up, as happens in every family, by earlier family members to sort of fill in gaps that people didn't know the answers to. And the 2 main figures in this sort of back and forth in which the Henry family is sort of trying to learn about its own history is James Henry, who's living up here in one of the homes at Boulton, and the man I mentioned before, John Wolfe Jordan, who's down in Philadelphia, a professional historian. James Henry is a very interesting man. I'm not really going to talk much about him today. I'm going to talk about sort of the next generation. But James Henry, was born into this gun-making family. He has to take it over when his father dies at only 50. But James Henry really wanted to be a historian, a scholar, a teacher. He taught at Nazareth Hall. He wrote books about Moravian history. He wrote lots of articles about Moravian history. He would go down to the Nazareth church when the church records were still there, and he'd burrow into the records. He could read German script. He was really a scholar who was forced to be a gun maker. And he lives till 85 up in Jacobsburg, up at the Boulton properties. And he's very mentally active. And he's digging through all the family papers up there, and he's sending information down to John Wolfe Jordan, who's down in Philadelphia. And John Wolfe Jordan is digging through not just the family papers in Philadelphia, but he's going to churches, local churches, to look through church registers to see if there were any Henrys there and things like that. So there's this incredible correspondence between these 2 historians, one professionalized in Philadelphia and one I guess you'd call him an amateur historian, really up in the Pennsylvania backwoods, just sort of learning about their family's very interesting history. That's what sort of got me initially interested in this sort of vast paper archive that the Henrys had. That correspondence mostly ends around 1910. James Henry has died a few years early. His son, Granville Henry, has sort of taken over the correspondence with his cousin down in Philadelphia. And in 1910, John Wolfe Jordan, the guy whose picture was down in the lower corner there, his brother, bizarrely, why John Wolfe Jordan didn't do this is a mystery, but his brother writes this book called The Life of William Henry. And that sort of put in print, which really fixes things, that really put in print all the Henry family information that they had at the time, also put into print a lot of the family stories, some of which we now know are sort of legends and tall tales. But that really put an end. The Henrys felt they had done their genealogical work, and they put it all in this book. So when, I wasn't going to show you that just yet. And I'm not going to say a whole lot more about that material. I really want to get to telling you about what this other batch of material tells us. But maybe I will. Let me give you some of the challenges of reading this material. So one is just the handwriting. If you could see it better, it would not be any better. I don't know how well you can see it, but it's not good handwriting. This is James Henry's handwriting, writing down to John Wolfe Jordan. This is better. I mean, I guess we don't teach cursive anymore, so it's not going to be good for the younger generation. But this is a pretty good handwriting. John Wolfe Jordan had a good had very good handwriting. About, I wrote it down somewhere here. In June of 2022, I got an email from a local woman who often comes to these talks. She's been to my talks before. Her name is Jan Schott, S-C-H-O-T-T. It's not really necessary to know how to spell her name, but she wrote and wanted to volunteer at Jacobsburg. And she decided to tackle transcribing letters. And really, in all the years that I've been at Jacobsburg and worked myself on these letters, I never really had a volunteer who was willing to start transcribing the letters. Transcription is really important because then everyone doesn't have to deal with this. And once it's transcribed, if it's in a electronic document, a Word document, it's searchable for any subsequent researcher. So she decided she would transcribe. And because this is what I was interested in, I set her on this first. This sort of public exchange between Henry family members learning about their own history. She transcribed, are you all sitting down? She transcribed 427,000 words. So that's almost a half a million words of this correspondence. Again, what I would call sort of the public-facing correspondence of the Henrys as they're trying to figure out their own importance. Just to give you a sense of how vast that work was, the book that Laurie mentioned, The Letters of Mary Penry, which is just a normal-sized volume, that's about 95,000 words. So she transcribed 5 published volumes. They're not published, but what would be 5 published volumes of letters back and forth between different Henry family members. And this was, again, to me, a very interesting correspondence. It was a very male correspondence. It's all these male members of the Henry family writing to each other. And again, it's a very public correspondence. They're trying to figure out their own sort of public standing. And Jan sort of finished that at 500,000 words, and we tried to figure out what she should tackle next. And we decided that maybe she should focus on the Henrys as a family. And we didn't really know where that would lead us, but I knew that it would lead us to the women in the family rather than to the men in the family. I knew there were boxes and boxes of letters that really nobody had looked through because, again, the people who had looked through this were interested in the gun business. That's the male side of the family. There were letters from the various women who lived in the Henry family household. Nobody had dipped into these letters. And so in November of 2023, so she'd been transcribing for about a year, that other stuff. In November of 2023, I asked Jan whether she'd be interested in beginning with the vast correspondence of Mary Elizabeth Krause Henry. This was the wife of the last gunsmith at Jacobsburg at Boulton. His name was Granville. Mary Elizabeth Krause Henry was his wife. She was born in Bethlehem. You can see here, I think I have a pointer. Anyone see red? Oh, there we go. Okay, this is Granville. This picture was taken, I just learned this morning, in 1899. So this is Granville. He's in his late 60s there. This is his wife, whose correspondence we began with, Mary Elizabeth Krause Henry. She was born in 1934, so I guess that would make her about 65. And this is their daughter, Molly Henry. We'll talk a lot about her in a few minutes. They're at a family picnic in 1899. So Jan started on this correspondence, the letters written by Mary Elizabeth Krause Henry, the woman up in the upper right there. Jan would transcribe a letter or two. Now, usually she does about 3 a day, and she sends them to me, and I check them. So she has copies of the letters. I have someone who digitizes them. We print them. I send them to Jan. She'll transcribe the letter. She'll send me the document. And she sent me the first one on 13 December 2023. So what is that, a year and 3 or 4 months ago. She's been diligently transcribing ever since. We've been calling it the Boulton Circle correspondence because it really is the correspondence of the people who lived at Boulton. It's a more family-centered correspondence. As of a few days ago, that correspondence has reached 555,718 words. So another 500,000 words Jan has transcribed. The center of the correspondence is this woman, who I mentioned before, Mary Elizabeth Krause Henry. She died the day before she would have turned 90. She was born in Bethlehem, a very prominent family, the Krauses. They owned a big hardware store there. She married Granville Henry in 1869 and moved up to Boulton, moved up to the family house. And then she lived at Boulton for about 65 years. This is her in older age. And Granville and Mary had one daughter, one child who was a daughter. She was born in 1873. Do you see her dates there? She lived to 101. Apparently sharp as a tack until the end. She's a very interesting woman. Again, we sort of knew the outlines of her life, but nothing like what we know now, having transcribed so many of these letters to her and also letters from her. She married a doctor, Tom Stites, in 1905. He was a distant cousin, and they'd known each other for a very long time. From the letters, it seems pretty clear that that marriage was, I don't want to say it was arranged, but I think the families knew they were going to get married long before 1905. And then once they do marry, Molly isn't at Boulton for a very long time because Dr. Stites, he's not a local general practitioner. His specialty is basically running. He's a tuberculosis specialist, but he basically runs institutions. And so he keeps getting posted in different places around Pennsylvania and elsewhere. So you can really track this from the letters because, the letters that Molly are writing back then they would always put a date at the top of the letter and the place they were writing from. In addition, the letters that Mary's writing to Molly have addresses on the envelopes. So when they first married, they were up in Scranton. Then they moved to Hamburg. That's right out by Cabela's on 78. Then they were in Harrisburg. Then for a number of years, they were down in the South. They were in North Carolina and in Louisiana, again, because Tom was being moved around to different hospitals. And then they moved back to Pennsylvania, to sort of western Pennsylvania, Cresson out past Penn State. And then they moved back to Boulton only in 1935. Tom was basically retiring. And they spent the rest of their lives here. Tom dies, I think, in the 1950s. And Molly lives, as I mentioned, till 101. She dies in 1974. And she celebrated her 100th birthday there at Boulton. So Jan began transcribing these letters from mother to daughter. I'm not sure if I'm a slide ahead or a slide behind. As I mentioned, we really had no idea what we would find because no one had read these letters before, at least no one that I know of. And it is surprising, by the way, that the correspondence would be saved at all. I'm talking about the letters that Mary Henry at Boulton was writing to her daughter, wherever the daughter was. I mean, why would they be at Boulton? Well, they're only at Boulton because Molly retired here and brought all that with her. Typically, that correspondence would be lost to us because Molly would have lived somewhere else and died somewhere else, and the correspondence would be somewhere else. But because Molly saved all these letters from her mother, which must have filled many a box, and brought them back to Boulton when she moved back here, we have that correspondence. So it's sort of a small miracle. I should say Mary, the mother, didn't save Molly's correspondence. She did save some of it, but she pruned it. She says it in a number of letters. I don't really know why she was concerned about space, but she would keep only, she doesn't say what her pruning principles were, but she would only keep some of the letters. And sometimes she would only keep a couple pages from the letters and then put a date on it because she was throwing out the first page, which had the date. So, if Molly had described something interesting, she would save those pages and she would throw away the rest of the letter. So Molly's correspondence, the letter that Molly are writing back to her parents, is small. But the letters from Mary to Molly are really vast. Mary's handwriting is pretty good. But you see at the top what they called in the 18th century cross-writing. That's a bit of a challenge. They were concerned about space, so they would often finish a letter or sometimes write several pages of a letter across the first part of the letter. In a letter from Granville, this is Mary's husband, so the husband of the person who wrote this letter. In a letter from Granville, he treats cross-writing as a woman's fad. He says, because he cross-writes at one point in a letter, and he says to his daughter, "Here I am following your example and crossing my page. Writing to ladies is infectious," he says. Molly's handwriting is awful. Yeah. Okay. So comparatively, it's awful. One thing you learn from the letters is that Mary Elizabeth Krause Henry, Molly's mother, she is what we would call a helicopter parent. In fact, the most surprising thing about all the letters, now that I think about it, is that she does not rebuke Molly letter after letter for her bad handwriting, because she's very domineering, I guess is the word. They have an extremely close relationship, Mary up here and Molly, married to her doctor husband. Sometimes they exchange several letters a week. Even very late in life, when Mary is in her 80s and Molly is in her 40s, late 40s, Mary is reminding Molly to write thank you notes when she gets birthday gifts. So it really is amazing that in not a single letter does she criticize Molly's handwriting. The number of letters begins to decline because don't know why, but probably because they get telephones, and so they stop writing to each other as frequently as they did before. The thing that they are most obsessed with, they probably wouldn't think of it as obsessed, but in almost every letter, almost every letter begins on Mary's end by saying, "Your letter posted at 5 p.m. yesterday arrived here at 11 a.m. this morning." They track the efficiency of the mail, and which is incredibly efficient in almost every letter, and they are annoyed. The word Mary often uses is provoked. "I am so provoked," she says. "I'm very provoked that the letter didn't arrive until the next day, or like at a 5 p.m. mail." They must have got delivery several times a day, or they could go down. If someone was going to Nazareth, they could pick up the mail. So they're very interested in the efficiency of the mails. They expect it to be extremely efficient. The other thing you really learn from the letters is what a community it was up there at Boulton. And I think, I don't want to say Jacobsburg as a whole forgets this, but I forget this when I talk about Jacobsburg, is that, we're very focused on that home in my first slide where all the Henry, where Granville and Mary lived and the gunsmiths lived mainly, and the homestead across the street, which now has a gun museum. Those are our buildings. We're very focused on them and the people who live there. But Boulton was actually a community of Henrys. And do I still have my little thing on? Oh, maybe I have to hold it down. Okay, so this is Granville and Mary's house. So 33 is down here. And this is the road off of 33, the Belfast exit. You go over the bridge, you go up this little hill. And Granville and Mary's house is the Jacobsburg Historical Society building here on the left. The Pennsylvania Long Rifle Museum is over on the other side of the road. In a house where one of our friends in this room live was one of the brothers. Granville's brother, Robert, and his wife lived here. Granville's other brother, Edward, lived right up the hill. There's a big hill here. He lived at the top of the hill. In the homestead was the other, the fourth sibling, the third brother of Granville, Charles, with his wife, and their two sisters who remained unmarried throughout their lives. So the 6 Henry siblings lived, and this whole area came to be known as Boulton. So they call them the aunties. When the aunties write letters, they always sign them Boulton as well, and on their stationery it says Boulton. So this whole area is Boulton. And these are the 6 children of James Henry, who I showed you before, the sort of scholar who had to become a gunsmith. So, and you really realize from these letters what an incredible community this was. They were all here, they were all born here, they all stayed here, and they all lived here into their 70s and 80s. And their children, many of the children who you see written there, also remain near Boulton. Although I think it's fair to say that the children scattered more than that generation of 6 siblings did. So they were all there. They visited each other's house constantly. They would go over for supper or dinner, whatever the difference between those two things are. Supper, dinner, lunch, breakfast. They would visit each other all the time. And so a lot of the family letters are exchanging sort of gossip about who's sick, who's getting married, who graduated from this, who hurt themselves, things like that. Almost every letter talks about the circulation of people among these houses. Okay, so the letters reveal a lot, far more than I could tell you about today. So, I'll go through a few things, and then I'm interested to know what you're interested in knowing if the correspondence contains, and we can talk about that. But for those of us who are associated with Jacobsburg, the people who interpret the houses up there, the letters are absolutely priceless. For instance, we know when they got their first telephone in the home. Does anyone else want to guess a year? Those of you who came to this talk before are not allowed to guess the year. Anyone want to guess a year? First telephone. I don't hear any guesses. Who guessed that? Well, prize. First guess. Here's what Mary writes in... Oh, it says it on the screen. Okay. No prize. Okay. So this is what Mary writes on 23 November 1906. Yesterday the telephone men were here and put up the wire to the stair window, but the boxes have not yet come. However, they telephoned into Nazareth to inquire the number of our phone. That was the first message. And the first phone call to Molly, the daughter who's living elsewhere, seems to have been December 6th, so about 2 weeks later. And this is what Molly wrote back. She says, "Well, I was surprised last evening to find myself talking to you at home. It seems strange indeed to think that there are telephones at Boulton. How I did enjoy our little talk. I could hear and understand you perfectly and recognized your voice immediately. It does seem so nice to think that we can talk from Scranton to Boulton. I was quite excited by the time I was through talking and can imagine the excitement at home throughout the family, meaning everyone at Boulton. I'm so glad the phone is in and hope it will be satisfactory. I am sure you will all enjoy it and use it more than you ever think." So telephones go in 1906. We know things like, I won't quiz you because I've given you the answers already. We know things like when the various rooms in the house were wallpapered. It's a very rare historic home that kind of information has survived for the life of the home. And then these rooms were re-wallpapered with sort of odd frequency. This is from April 1908. This is Mary writing again. "The paper hanger came yesterday and is working in your room," she's writing to Molly. "I sent for Alice to help me, for our Culver to take off the paper." The letters are filled with names of Nazareth craftsmen and tradesmen and other things like that. "And as Mrs. Fair was here washing, I had 6 work people to look after, including Helen and Cal." We'll get back to that in a minute, because one of the things the letters really reveal are how many people worked in that house for the Henrys. "You can imagine the confusion," Mary writes, "in the house, but Alice is such good help in every way. I think she is the best help I have ever had, and I am making the most of her. This morning she washed out the hall closet and those in Papa's room. We had to take down all the old dishes." If you've been to the Henry houses, you know there are these beautiful porches on the side of the house and on the front of the house. And the letters record all the buildings and the rebuildings of the porches. This one from April 1914. Mary again. Yesterday morning was so bright that I decided to go to Boulton. Her husband has died now. Granville had died 2 years earlier. And so Mary has started to spend because Molly's away and her husband is gone, she's alone in the big house. She started to spend a lot of her time elsewhere. So she's living with the Krauses, with her brother, who she's very close to, in Bethlehem. So she writes that she decided to go to Boulton. She takes a car ride up to see her house, even though she's still living, I guess it's not quite spring yet, although it is spring, April 1914. She's still living in Bethlehem. I phoned to see if the aunties were at home, so she's going to go visit her sister-in-laws, and it suited very well. Cal met me at Lobb's store. We'll get back to Cal in a minute. And on the way home, I stopped to see about the house. It looks very well, and the carpenters had nearly finished the inside and the front porch, and the back porch had been started. I am well satisfied with everything. And a decade later, there's yet more information about the porch. I won't read this one to you, but the letters reveal so much more. We know a lot about the clothes that Mary purchased in Easton. She would go to Easton all the time and purchase clothing. She'll talk about what store she went to. She'll describe the dresses she wants, trying to inform or impress Molly in great detail. A lot of that clothing survives in the Henry family home now. So I think one interesting project would be to try to match Mary's descriptions in the letters with the clothes that survive in the home. I mentioned that she goes to Easton for her clothing. The Henrys traveled a lot from this then remote spot on the Bushkill Creek in Bushkill Township. There were trolleys that left from Belfast, and they would take trains down to Bethlehem and trolleys. They moved around a lot, especially the women. Granville was a bit of a homebody. He wasn't in the best of health, but the women traveled a lot to Easton, to Bethlehem, to Allentown. And Mary would also go visit her daughter, Molly, when she was living somewhere else. We learn about the first automobiles at Boulton, too. It's a bit of a mystery. But Ed Henry, who lives in one of the other houses, the brother, Edward, he got a car in July. This one you can guess. What year do you think he got the first car at Boulton, which was Edward Henry's car? Anyone have a year? Earlier than 1912. 1908, they got a car. He got a second car in the summer of 1909. Tom and Molly, the younger generation who were living elsewhere, they got their first car in the summer of 1911. And Mary herself purchased a car, an Essex, not until 1919 or maybe 1918. Is there a question in the back? The aunties. The two aunties. Yes, I will get back to the help for sure. I'm getting there. The letters also cleared up an interesting mystery. Those of us who work at Jacobsburg this is a letter written by one of the aunties, by the way, have often been asked about relations between the Henry family, this one great Northampton County, Bushkill Township family, and the Martin family, this other great industrial or crafts-centered family in the Martin guitar folks. I think we had no information about that. We didn't really know what to say. So about, I don't know when it was, 3 months ago, Jan was transcribing a letter that said this. It's a letter from Clara Henry, one of the aunties, to Mary Henry Stites. That would be Granville and Mary Henry's granddaughter. And she says, I think it's your turn to have a letter, so I will answer your nice letter received some time ago and tell you of the many experiences we have had. Sad and unexpected events have taken place, of which you no doubt have heard from home. There is an account of Herbert's sickness and death in this week's item. That was the local Nazareth newspaper, which I will enclose so that you can read the particulars of his sad end. Poor Harriet feels very sad about it, and to all of us, it is a great disappointment. We think that in every way he was worthy of having Harriet, and she had become very much attached to him. How uncertain life is. So when we transcribed this letter, we had no idea who Herbert was, But since it said there was a notice about it in the item, and those newspapers have been digitized, I went and looked in the item around January 7th, 1927, and it turns out this was Herbert Martin. Herbert Keller Martin, he dies in 1927. He's the brother of Christian Frederick Martin, who ran Martin Guitar from the 40s, I think, until his death in the 80s. And it's Christian Frederick's son who runs Martin Guitar now. So Herbert was the uncle of the current proprietor at Martin Guitar. And it turns out that it's Harriet Henry. Harriet was one of the unmarried daughters of, like Molly's first cousin. Harriet and Herbert Martin seem to have been engaged. They never used the term engaged, but there's a clear assumption that they were going to marry. So there is a connection between the Martin family and the Henry family, a connection that never happened. Not between, as we thought, Mary Henry Stites and some Martin, but between one of the lesser-known Boulton girls, Harriet, and Herbert Martin. It's mysteries like this that sort of pop up all the time in these letters. Okay, this is the last topic I'm going to cover, which gets back to all the people in the house. This was the real revelation for me in these letters. It's the number of people who Mary Elizabeth Krause Henry had working in her home. And these are really the forgotten figures at Boulton. There are no letters from them. Actually, there's one. I'll show you in a minute. There's really no letters from them. We just get their names. And of course, Mary doesn't mention their full names. She just says Alice was in the house, as she did in the previous letter. Well, who's Alice? Mrs. Fair was in the house, she said in the letter I read before. Who is Mrs. Fair? So in this letter, for instance, she says, yes, this is from 1898. Yesterday, Mrs. Fair came to iron, so I kept her to clean a chicken, and to clean the cellar, and to clean the kitchen thoroughly. This results, you see, in my being able to write letters on a Friday morning. It's a neat letter because it shows that Mary's leisure came from having all these other people working under her in the house. And in letter after letter, she talks about Mrs. Fair. We had no idea. I'm gonna move through these letters, but we had no idea who Mrs. Fair was, and no real way. There are lots of fairs, F-E-H-R, lots of fairs in the neighborhood. There's a fair road not far from Boulton. In this letter, for instance, I'll just read you this one. She says, I've been sitting on the porch nearly all morning, sewing, writing, and reading, also entertaining Mrs. Fair for a while. I think she gets a little homesick sometimes for the old place, meaning the place she used to work. She certainly was a faithful soul. She worked for me for 26 years. So who was Mrs. Fair? We just kept transcribing letters. Her name was there. Mystery. Really no easy way to solve the mystery. But then a clue came in a letter I was transcribing from Granville Henry. This is Mary's husband. There's his handwriting. And he says in this 1906 letter, Mama, meaning Mary, has Miss Aurelia and her sister, Mrs. Lewis Fair, under her direction today. So she requested me to write to you. So Granville's been deputized to write because Mary is monitoring all the servants in the house. But he says that Mrs. Fair is Mrs. Lewis Fair. And she had a sister, Aurelia. Aurelia had also been mentioned in lots of letters. No one knew, we didn't know she was related to Mrs. Fair, but it's her sister. And through not Amazon, Ancestry.com and other kinds of things, we were able to figure out that Mrs. Fair was Emma Kohler Fair. She was born in 1845. She dies in 1914, just a few years after she came back to the house to sit on the porch with Mary. And Aurelia was her younger sister. So we've been able to figure out who some of the servants are. And I want to mention just one more before I see what you are interested in asking about. And this is Cora and Cal. They're the longtime workers in the house. It was easier to learn who these people were, although the extent of their work in the Henry home is just totally eye-opening. So Cora was a woman named Cora Cluel Bapp. Bapp is her married name, B-A-B-P. And she seems to have started working for the Henrys in 1892. I said there were no letters written from the servants, but this is the one. This is the letter that Cora writes to Mary when she's leaving to marry Cal. And Mary has annotated it down here. No, went too far. went much too far. Mary has annotated it down here. You can't quite read it, but it says, written after having lived with us nearly 6 years. So Cora lived in the house for 6 years as a servant. She goes off and marries someone named Cal. It's not clear when he started to work in the house, probably after their marriage. But he begins to show up in the letters in 1905 or so, like almost about 10 years later. He does everything in the Henry family home. He builds drain pipes for refrigerators. He lays carpet. He does heavy labor. He keeps the furnace going. This is a letter where Mary says, Cal helped me with closing the shutters last evening, and I told him to take the kitchen door key home with him. So this morning he had the fire fixed and the ashes emptied and dining room and kitchen windows opened before I was ready to go up. Cal is really the property manager. He works there for 45 years. He takes care of the horses. He's the gardener. He's the landscaper. In this letter, he's planted 60 tulips and 60 crocuses. He takes the roses out of the back bed of the house and plants them in the garden. He's there every day working on the Henry properties. If you've been to the Henry property, you know there's a little circular drive in front with a green ring. He plants evergreens in that ring at one point. This is the last letter I'll read you from Cal. It's in 1907, not from Cal, but about Cal. Mary writes, this morning, Cal got out the snowplow and made paths all around Boulton. Frank enjoyed it very much. Frank is the horse. Frank enjoyed it very much. He is so glad to get out of the stable. Cal said that he neighed with delight yesterday when he took him out in the snow. Our yard is beautiful. The trees are loaded with snow, but not weighed down to excess. So as I say, I could go on with many more of these things. I wanted to end with just this. This is the letter that Jan sent me yesterday. Oop, that's it. This is a letter from William E. Henry. Okay, so William is one of Molly's generation. So Molly's born in 1873. I think he's born in 1876. He's 11 when he writes this letter. He lives right up the hill from Molly. He's part of that whole Boulton group. And he writes to his little older cousin down the hill. It's a very cute letter. He was the postmaster in Nazareth for 35 years, William E. Henry. He says, Dear Mary, he's writing to Molly, how are you? I feel pretty good today. Papa said I might go out, for I was invited down to Grandpa's to dinner. That's the elderly James Henry, still alive, almost 90, living in the Henry homestead. And tomorrow, Will says, I'm invited to Grandpa's to a chicken dinner, providing I help clean it. I wish I could see you. I have not seen you for a long time, he writes, which probably means like 3 days. They live across the street from each other. But it gives you a very good sense of Boulton, of the family living there, the little children are visiting the grandparents, over there. And this is a picture of Molly, who you've heard so much about. She's in the middle. She's probably 98 there. And that's Will, the little boy who wrote the letter to Molly. He's probably 96 there. She makes it just to 101. Will dies, I think, at 99. So these two people knew each other as tiny children. Molly moves away. Will doesn't. Molly comes back, though, and they're still at Boulton nearly 100 years later together. That's Mary Henry Stites on the far left. She's the last Henry to live on the Boulton property. She dies in 1989. One of the funny things about the letters is in nearly all the letters that Molly writes after Mary Henry Stites is born, she's never referred to by her name. She's just referred to as baby. So there's sort of this running joke that we just, what is baby doing today? By the time her younger sister is born, she's no longer baby. She has to be given a name. But she's just baby through all the letters. So I think this is a great picture of sort of Boulton and the long-lastedness of these families who lived together in this space for so many years. So that's a tiny sliver of what we've discovered in this vast correspondence. Are there other things that you'd be interested in knowing about? Roseanne? They were very educated. They went to the Bethlehem, almost all of them went to the Bethlehem Girls' School, which was, from the 18th century, one of the country's finest institutions for women's education. So all the girls went to the Bethlehem Girls' School. And the boys went to Nazareth Hall, an equally fine institution. Yes, ma'am. How old was Mary? I think she got the car in 1918, and she was born in 1834, 65, 70, so in her 80s. Now, I'm not sure Mary was doing the driving. Cal would have been doing the driving, but maybe having the car enabled her to get around better. Yes, ma'am. Well, I mean, a lot. Mainly lists of people, some of whom we've been able to identify purely by chance, some of whom we haven't, and then just the scope of the tasks. The cleaning, the sort of regular rotation of cleaning, you know, closets and dishes and this room and then that room, would be very easily to be, you could really chart that out from these letters, sort of the inside of the house. And then it does seem like most of the work on the outside of the house is done by this guy Cal, although he'll often supervise, like in one of the letters, actually from that little boy Will, he says the threshers are coming. Is that because I'm asking my other Jacobsburg people, is that because they would be growing hay or something for the horses, maybe? So, but Cal would have been supervising those people. So, yeah, I think if one wanted to learn more, all of these files are searchable now, and one could search by the names of the workers and see what they're doing at what times. It would be not an easily accomplishable project, but definitely an accomplishable project. Sure, in the back. Did the servants live on property, or did they have their own homes? That's a tough question. It seems like some did. So I think the room that now at Jacobsburg we call the gentleman's study, which is sort of above the original kitchen, and there's a weird little stairway that goes up there. I think that gentleman's study was probably originally a servant's quarters. And we know from one of the letters that I read that Cora had lived in the house for 6 years. In some of the later letters, Mrs. Fair, when they're coming over by the day. Cal and Cora had their own house, and they were coming over by the day. So later on, I would say the people we might call the hired help, the servants, were living elsewhere. There was also, I guess you'd call it nursing care in the house, or just companion care in the house. So again, almost all these people are living at Boulton in all the houses into their late 70s, early 80s. You know, Mary's living there till she's 90. One other thing that the letters are very specific about that I didn't mention is who's caring for Mary. So Mary is always writing to Molly elsewhere saying, you know, Mrs. So-and-so or so-and-so will be with me for the next 3 months. And I think so-and-so will be able to come after that. So she's always reassuring Molly that there's people in the house to take care of her. So those people, I think, are living in the house. Yes, ma'am. The encampments that Jacobsburg sponsors now, I would think the 70s, but I'm not really sure. When Jacobsburg started to put on the encampments? Okay. So when Mary Henry Stites was still alive, they were over at the Environmental Center. When Mary Henry Stites, on the left there, when she passes away in 1989 and those properties pass to Jacobsburg or to the state, they move over to the properties there. Yes, sir. Oh. Yeah. Mm. Wow. Yeah. One other thing that the letter, now that you mentioned her room, one other thing that the letters enable the folks, will enable the folks at Jacobsburg to do if they haven't already, that the sort of house committee, is figure out whose room was whose. Because in some of the letters, Mary will say, we just wallpapered your room with this pattern, and we wallpapered this other room with this pattern. And that wallpaper, I believe, is still up. And so we could know whose room was whose through those kinds of details. Yes, ma'am. Funding. Well, Mary Henry Stites left bequests that I think have been invested and yield income for the support of the society, but the society can always use more. Fair enough? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Sort of. So in the 18th century, the Moravians opened their excellent education system to the general public, 1785. There's a girls' school in Bethlehem, and then the boys' school is up here in Nazareth. That remains a school located in Bethlehem. What am I trying to say? It's a girls' academy into the 20th century. You could board, yes, they were day students, but it was a boarding school, and they formed very close friendships. Some of Molly's and Mary's closest friends, from whom she receives letters through her entire life, are people she met, 70 years earlier at the girls' school. The girls' school is the source of the date that Moravian College uses to claim itself as the 6th oldest college in America. So the Moravians founded a girls' school in 1742. It was for 6 12-year-olds. It was separated from the boys' school until, I think, the 1950s. As soon as those two schools merged as a coeducational institution, Moravian College started to use the date 1742 as their origin date. They hadn't before. They'd used 1807 as their origin date because that was anyway, doesn't matter why. So Moravian College is really the descendant of the girls' school. Moravian University, sorry. Sir. Yeah. The Henrys were from Scotland, it seems. Emigrated in the 1730s, I believe. The person who people tend to think of as the patriarch of the family, who wasn't the first immigrant, is this guy William Henry of Lancaster. So they were a family in Lancaster. They were really centered in south central Pennsylvania, if that's what you call the Lancaster area. Until William Henry II, his son, moves up here during the war to work in a gun shop. That's the origin of the Henrys here in Lancaster County. They became Moravians in Lancaster City, not here in Bethlehem, in 1765. They sent their children to the girls' school. They sent their daughter Elizabeth here to the girls' school and one of their sons as well. So they're really a Lancaster County family who sort of die out in Lancaster, but the Northampton County branch sort of flourishes. Joe.
Two things. This picture struck me with Molly and her purse.
Yeah.
And I remember she always had her purse with her
Okay.
all the time.
Yeah. And her gun. You all notice they're all carrying long rifles, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
The other thing,
In the family, you have to carry, apparently, a long rifle everywhere you go. Go ahead, Joe.
doing some research on the old newsletters,
Uh-huh.
and I came across an article that mentioned about Hal Babb and the pony,
The pony.
and that the kids used to stop on the way home from school to see the pony. The day the pony died,
Yes.
Hal hurriedly buried
Yes.
the pony
Yeah.
so that the kids wouldn't be coming
Yeah.
back saying,
Yeah. I think this pony's name was General. And there is another letter. I think it's from Cora. So it's another letter from Cora, who writes to Mary to tell her of the, because when Mary gets older, she starts living with Molly a lot. So Especially, she summers in Boulton, back here, but she's living with Molly wherever Molly is, in Cresson or elsewhere. So Cora, there's the Bapps are still taking care of the house, and there are other people at Boulton. The aunties are in their house and things like that. But she writes to Mary out in Harrisburg or somewhere saying that the general has passed away. Yep. Bobby. Yeah. No, there's not a single trace. Bobby was saying, do we have any idea how much the hired servants were paid? I think there's not a trace in any of the letters of income. I mean, of payments that would enable us to tell us what their rate was. Yeah, maybe they took food home or, yep. Yes. Well, I was wondering if any of you knew that Cora and Cal have had a daughter named Annie Bapp. I can't remember whether she married or not, so she might have had a different last name, but I think she did marry, and she lived to almost 100, and I believe just died about 10 years ago. She had eye issues. I know as a child she had eye issues. Oh, Henry, yes. Yes.
And they lived across the road. And behind the house was a pond.
Right. So here are Harriet and Helen. They grew up in this house. Are you saying they lived in what's now the Pennsylvania Long Rifle Museum as well? The aunties die in the late 20s, so it could very well be that Harriet and Helen Henry, one of whom was a school teacher at the Boulton School up on the top of the hill. They may have well occupied the Long Rifle Museum. And I believe their sister or their niece, Ruth Henry Kluel, Jr., she was named after her mother and never married. I think they may have owned this homestead when the state took it over, but I'm not actually sure on that. But that would make sense that this family would be living in this home. So they were still at Boulton for quite a while. By the time, so Granville is the central figure in that. The gun manufacturing business pretty much peters out around 1895. Granville lives till 1812. But there are other industries at Boulton, including an extensive ice harvesting business. And the other brothers and Granville were partners in that business. Any other questions about the Henrys or the correspondence? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. It will be. It could be. It's not yet. I mean, I have these large, very, very large files. My plan is to just sort of convert them to a PDF and load them up to the Jacobsburg Historical Society website. So they will be probably quite soon available to the public. This thing that we're calling the Boulton Circle, that's what I've mainly been talking about in the second half of the talk today, the family correspondence between the women that reveals so much about the house and the properties and the community at Boulton. I would say we're almost done transcribing that. We've done all the letters from Mary to family members. We've done all the letters from the aunties to family members. Karen Whitehill, a great volunteer at Jacobsburg, she's transcribing, God bless her because the handwriting is so bad, the letters from Molly. She's done all the letters from Molly to her mother, Molly to her aunts, and now she's transcribing the letters from Molly to her husband, the doctor, the ones that she's writing when she's at Boulton. There's probably other things that we could transcribe that would be part of that Boulton circle, but a lot of the other correspondence is sort of different. So I sort of feel like we're reaching the end of that, and then I think I'll load them up to the website. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. They really did. I have no explanation of that. They did all live to a very ripe age, you know, late 70s, 80s, some over 100, some pushing 100. I don't know. I don't know. Good genes. And yeah. Not all of them, no. But a large number of the, in this sibling group, these 6 siblings, Granville, Robert, Edward, Charles, and the 2 unmarried sisters, I believe they all lived into their 70s and some of them deep into their 80s. And they were still living, you know, they weren't living alone, but they were living independently. The aunties would, I think, live in Nazareth. They would move to Nazareth for the winters, and then they would go back to their house. And when Charles's wife dies, they take care of their brother Charles. So it's a very close family that are really, you know, supporting each other. Any last question? Okay, well, thank you so much for listening and for coming out.
Wow, that was wonderful and very interesting. Again, another round of applause for Scott. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.